Cinematography is a mix of the technical and the creative. A key concept to finding that balance is lighting. American Cinematographer sits down with Chris Chomyn, ASC, in this interview to discuss all things lighting. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to ask you, starting out, why lighting is so important as a DP.
I think for a cinematographer, lighting is really important because it's one of the few areas that we can put our fingerprints on it. Oftentimes we may suggest a shot or suggest a camera move. It may be we do it, or maybe it's vetoed and we do something else. Like, we don't really have the final say in that. But for the most part, people let us light how we think it should be lit. And a lot of time there's been conversations about it in pre-production. And so, the director certainly knows what we're trying to do, and we're allies in that. But the minutia of it, the details of it, are really left to us. And so it's a way where we can really express ourselves. I think it was even more so in the film days, because in the film days, the cinematographer was the only person who actually knew what it was going to look like when dailies came back. Like, we knew I lit something that's a certain brightness, or I let something be a certain darkness, and if it was printed where we wanted it printed, we knew what it was going to look like. I think it's still essential for the cinematographer. That is our form of expression. It's unique to us. I think it's interesting in today's world where people are marketing lenses, and they're saying if you want to have your own style, the lens you choose defines your style. I don't think so. I think the lens is part of it, and if you have a lens that you have either tuned by somebody or you've tuned it, that's part of it. But to say the lens is a style, that says if you shoot something with a certain lens and I shoot something with a certain lens, with the same lens, they'll look the same. And they don't look the same, because we're making probably hundreds of choices every moment that impact what the final product looks like. Mm-hmm. Lens is one of them. Where we put it, where we put the camera in relationship to the subject, how we light it. If we're working with natural light, how we use natural light. Do we add more? Do we subtract light? Do we change the direction? And then how do we expose? Do we expose for the shadow detail? Do we expose for highlight detail? Those are all choices we make, and we're making them at 24 times a second as someone's moving. Where do we put the subject in the frame, and what is their relationship to the space around them? All those elements work together to find the look of something. Mm-hmm. There's a trend to, I think it's passing a little bit, but maybe I'm just being wishful thinking, that everyone wanted to shoot everything wide open so it'd be out of focus with this beautiful bokeh in the background. The problem is, when you do that, is then none of your production design matters, because all of a sudden you can't see any of it. And if the design of a location informs who the character is who lives there or works there or exists in that space, and is part of the storytelling, it's one of the tools, then to get rid of it by making everything out of focus seems kind of a shame. You're throwing it away. I mean, it all works together. Mm-hmm. I've had designers come to me, and say, remember that wall we painted? Yeah, well, it doesn't look the way we thought it was going to look. Oh, and what can you do to help? Because we don't have time to paint it again. It's like now all of a sudden lighting has to somehow change the color of that wall and not affect the skin tones of a person you have to be. So there's ways that we use the tools, and I think you have to use all of them. I don't think there's one tool does the trick. I don't know if that answers it. But
so, I
touched on a lot of...
Right, and I mean, it's one of many aspects that goes into, how the tone of the film and the aesthetic is influenced by the cinematographer's work. And it depends so much on the individual project. So, I mean, it seems like it's a very much a lifelong lesson in lighting and learning really the best way, or not even the best way, but the best way for each circumstance, how to light something. So for someone who is starting out and looking to learn more about lighting, what would you recommend to them to do?
Wow. Well, first of all, they should look at lighting. They should look at lighting in paintings throughout history. They should look at lighting in film. They should watch films with the sound off. They should watch films with the color off. and study them, and they will learn a lot. They may not know how to do things, but they'll see what's being done. They'll start to dissect what's being done. I think, people always say the script is the blueprint, right? You have to have the script, and that tells you what to do. I think that's true, but I also think that what it tells each of us is unique to who we are, because we're reading a script through the lens of our experience. And so if you and I are handed the same script, we're not going to necessarily approach making the film the same way, because you're basing your reaction, or your reaction to the script is somehow filtered through everything you've been through in your life, and the places you've been, the people you've known, the things you've done, the things you wish you had done. All of that is going to affect you, and minute to minute, every minute goes by, you're more experienced in something, right? Because and for me, I'm going to have the same kind of reactions based on my lens of experience. And so even though the script is a blueprint, the blueprint is kind of infinitely interpretable, if that's a word. And I think that's what makes it really exciting and interesting. So when I read a script, I think the first time through, I try to read it just for story. Like, is this a story that I want to be involved in? And is this a story that I feel I can make better by being involved? If it's something that I don't feel I can contribute to, I'd rather not spend the time. I've got better things to do than work on something that I'm not going to make better. And of course, I have to hope that the producer and the directors think that I'm going to help make it better too, or else they won't offer me the job. So we have to all be in line with that. So to go back to your actual question, which I haven't answered, is, probably somebody who's starting out, probably the first thing they should do is have a friend sit in a chair, and they could put a camera on the person and just move a light bulb around their head, about high, down low, up high, behind them, in front of them, and just make note of how the angle of light affects their perception of the person. I mean, by changing the direction of the light, you can totally change the shape of a face, and that's something good to know. You certainly don't, if you don't want to go into it without knowing that, right? There's only 4 things you can do with lighting, basically. You can change the intensity of the light, the direction, the color, or the quality. And so the intensity is how bright or how dim it is. So you can move a light close to somebody and further away, and you can see. And if you're doing it on half their face where there's dark on the other, you can see how their face handles contrast. If you're dealing with color, you can either dim a light or put a gel on, and you can see some skin tones absorb some colors differently from others, and some reflect colors differently from others. And you want to know, ideally, especially with your leads, how to best photograph them for the story, not to make them beautiful necessarily, but to make them appropriate for what you're doing. The quality of light is the softness, right? How hard a shadow plays, and the bigger source, the softer of light. So it's a great idea. As you move the light closer to the person, it gets relatively larger, and the shadows get softer. And so you want to see, like, in this story, how do I want to portray this person? Do I want a hard edge on them or not? Do I want them to feel natural, like they're just in the space and it's just lit by window light? Those are decisions you have to make. And each of us will make those decisions based on who we are, of course. And then there's the reality hits. You have all this theory. You think, okay, I'm going to light this person a certain way. I'm going to light that person a certain way. And then all of a sudden you're on the set, and the action is staged, and there's one window and one lamp, and you're like, this doesn't fall into my plan. So you have to kind of be able to adapt. So knowing why you made choices is far more important than how you're doing it. Because if you know how to do it, and then you don't have the location that you thought you had, your how goes out the window. But if you know why you're doing it, and you can find another way to express that same idea through lighting, given the set of circumstances that you have that are not the ideal ones that you thought you would have.
Right.
And trust your instincts. And I think if you know the whys, that's, for me, for a long time, I tried to figure out, why is it that each of my films looks different from the others? And why is it that they look consistent within the context of them? And of course, there are different actors. Okay, that's one thing. There's different production design. Okay, that's another thing. But then there's also the rules of the world that I would run through in my head when I was making choices. And the rules for this world are not the same as the rules for that world. The questions we ask are the same, but the answers are different. And as long as you remember the answers, then every decision you make, you can weigh against that and you can make a choice that kind of supports that idea. The best thing to do to start doing it is to start doing it, and to
Yeah.
look at yourself critically. There are so many people who start off and they're so excited, which is great, but they're not able to see, they're not able to look critically. I think you have to look at your work critically and say, you know what, in all honesty, I didn't want to have that deep shadow there. I didn't want to show off that crow's foot, or I didn't want to have that light pinging the tip of the nose, which can be so distracting. And I didn't. Why is this not working? Why is it when, I photographed this person, they looked fine, but I photographed that person, all of a sudden I kind of did something similar, but all of a sudden there's something distracting. Well, because the two people are different, and you can't fall into a formula.
Yeah.
For one thing, it's boring, and another thing is we're all completely different. I mean, just look at us. Our skin colors are different.
Oh, yeah.
Our bone structure is different, and you kind of have to be able to adapt. So doing it over and over and over is probably the best way you can get good at it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'd love to look at some examples of your work in order to see how the why and how combine into what actually ends up on the screen. So let's see. Let me just